everybody. My name is Jake Esterberg, and this is Craig Myers here with us. We're a part of the board of directors of MPA.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Today, we just want to talk about some different things with electronics, different things that we've done in the past and currently do with our ensembles to make sure that we have successful seasons and successful shows.
Yeah, we're just going to kind of talk through, just a normal show day and some of the points in between where, just having a little bit of plans and preparation can really save you some stress and not take years off your life.
So I work with MBI Indoor Percussion, and we always practice our setup, and throughout the season we have very specific roles that every member has that when they set up their equipment, and especially electronics who have a lot to do to set up. We practice this all the time, but we're getting into our first couple shows here. So we've actually gone through and practiced a setup with our members. We don't necessarily have volunteers that help us push, but we do have other staff members who come in with us. So we've practiced what each person needs to do to make sure that when we get to the show, it doesn't freak everybody out and adjust everything. We have colored tape around all of the ends of the cords, not over the ends of the cords, but near the ends of the cords. And then the same colored tape of where that plugs in. So all you have to do is match the colors and it's great. Like I said, each person has their own job. And we do have a specific sound check. So we have somebody stand in front of each speaker to make sure that there's a thumbs up. And our cords are all wrapped, ready to go. So we just have to pull them and go for it.
Make sure to carve out a good amount of time to practice getting on and off the floor. We used to do 15 minutes before the first run. That wasn't enough time. We used to do an hour before the first run. That wasn't enough time a lot of times. So I did actually ask for an entire block of rehearsal, which sounds like a lot of time, and to a lot of directors, they're like, I need that time I got to fix this problem, this problem, this problem. This is going to fix so many more problems when your students and staff aren't stressed out because they're not quite super confident with how to get on and off the floor successfully. So it is worth the time with the sound check. I've made specific sounds myself. I have the tools to do that so that I could hear a sound coming out of each speaker and verify that that speaker was working, rather than someone just playing a middle C note on each keyboard. We can maybe use more professional sounds. Just kind of helps with even when you're sitting in the audience, you tend to notice, they've got their act together because everything is polished and planned. So, and then I can't stress wrapping cords enough. That's super huge in terms of making sure you're doing back winding properly so you don't have knots and we're not trying to untangle cables on the floor in front of hundreds of people. So.
Something that a lot of groups will do too is that they'll have a bucket that's attached to the synth cart, and inside the bucket there's a hole in the bottom where it's already plugged into the sound cart, and then all the cords are wrapped up inside. Some people will put a cone inside and wrap around the cone. You just grab the cord right off the top and it comes really nice and easy out to wherever you need to plug it in, to a speaker or wherever.
And the last thing I'll say is you don't want to stop practicing this once you've got it the first time. Practice it before every single show. Make sure to build it into the schedule. I know you got to have that extra 15 minutes to work on that snare roll, but man, this is so equally important to all of those details.
We want to also have as much set up before the show as we possibly can. This is making sure that all the cords are plugged in, the computer is attached to the synth is responding back and forth, you're getting sounds out of your monitors, all those things. Just that's one less thing that you need to worry about during warm-up, one less thing you need to worry about during the show setup, and just checking that those cords are wrapped, ready to go. If they're not ready to go, that's just another thing that you have to do during the setup for the show. Craig, do you want to talk a little bit about the UPS? This is something that I've added with my high school groups recently in the past few years. It's a really awesome thing, really awesome tool.
Yep. So UPS stands for uninterruptible power supply, and it's basically a battery for your system. So you can keep all of your devices powered up between warm up and setting up on the floor. What we've found in the past is a lot of times, like certain electronic devices have a certain boot time, and sometimes that can be minutes. Like especially older mixers, sometimes took like 2 to 3 minutes just to boot up from the power on sequence. So to have that already ready to go, super helpful. A lot of times people like ask me like, what how much capacity? Because basically each UPS has a certain capacity. It can hold so much power basically. And I usually say like if you are north of 1600 milliamps, that's gonna keep your equipment more than likely powered. At WGI, it's about 45 minutes from the end of warm up to when you're plugging in on the floor. So 1600 milliamps we found will make it that full 45 minutes down to the floor and then some. You just want to make sure that you're not plugging in any high consumption power devices like a power amplifier or a speaker, stuff that really draws a lot of wattage. These UPS batteries are not designed to handle those loads. So those should be plugged directly into raw power, and just your sensitive devices like your mixer, your laptop, maybe a router, those kinds of things should be plugged into the UPS. Charging it, you got to make sure you plan that, especially at WGI if you go on super late. On one night and then it's super early the next morning, you have to plug that in overnight or have a student assigned to do that because these do take 6 to 8 hours to fully charge. So it can be an issue sometimes. As far as hooking it up, I would plug the UPS into the raw power coming from the facility and then plug all your devices into the side that has the battery power. It's basically like a power strip. So you would just plug into the side that has battery power.
I want to reiterate also some of what Craig just said. You know, you're probably not plugging in your full sound system in all of that. It's just making sure that the computer, the synth, and the mixer are all talking to each other. And especially if you have a router set up, that I have found is like the thing that takes so long to set up and connect. If you have all those ready to go, all connected, it's just boom, 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 and you're ready for the show rather than waiting for anything. So we want to just cover going from warm up to the show as well. Like kind of what we were just talking about with the UPS, like you can leave just about everything on the synth cart plugged into that and make sure that those are all still talking to each other so that when you get to the show, you just plug the UPS directly into the facility, whatever they're providing. And then honestly, you're just good to go in that sense, making sure your cords are then plugged into the mixer or your snake, and then you can do your sound check from there. Like we've said a couple times already, just make sure that your cords are like wrapped, ready to go. So after warm up, make sure they're wrapped up, double check them. So you can just pull them and plug them in and they're good to go. Stuff may jiggle around in the sound cart on the way to the show. So just making sure that like anything is not loose and still plugged in all the way. I think that's like a big thing that I've found from warm up to the show.
And cords can jiggle just enough to get unplugged by just a little bit, and then you don't know why these devices aren't working together. Well, it's just got to go in that like extra eighth of an inch. So definitely want to test all that stuff, and just make sure that your students are also constantly this is part of their daily setup to just make rehearsal happen too, right? So they should be just as on top of understanding how when a cord is fully seated, how that should work, how to, if it's got a lock on it, how to release that lock so we're not damaging cords. And the other thing is that cords, if they get too close to wheels or casters, really easy for those to get wrapped up in there and then destroyed. And then, you're out of luck if that happens right before show, unless you have backup cords. And that's a great point to add is have backup cables, have, every single cable type. You got XLR, you got speak on, whatever it is, make sure you have an extra one just on site. You never know what's going to happen between warm up and the show.
And I think it's also just good practice in general to make sure that cords are never laying on the ground or in a place where they're going to get sucked up into something. I mean, you drag a cord on the ground you start to loosen pins, you loosen stuff, and you can damage the connection points too. Just making sure that those are always up. Um, Even at a high level of performance, like students still sometimes need to be reminded, hey, you have cords dragging on the ground. Like, make sure that's not happening, and making sure that they know to remind each other as well is huge.
And again, the more you practice this, the more it's part of their routine. And there's a lot going on in the midst of a show day. It's easy to get distracted. So if it's already part of a routine or a habit, it can really, really help you, even if the student's slightly distracted for some reason.
And then when you get on the floor, stuff can go wrong. Murphy's Law sometimes applies, but if you do everything you can to prevent it, it's usually small things that need to happen. Big thing is, if something goes wrong, stay calm. I've definitely been in a situation where I am like, oh my gosh, everything is not working. The big thing is if you stay calm and just go through your different troubleshooting things that we have here, you're going to be fine.
If you're calm, it keeps them a little bit more calm, and they'll probably have a more successful performance because they're just as nervous as you, maybe even more so, sitting out there with all eyes on them because the sound isn't working.
Make sure you do a sound check. Make sure that all the sounds are coming out when they need to. If stuff is not coming out the way it needs to, check all your connection points. I usually just walk by the mixer again, or all the connection points with a like my Scarlett, and just make sure that all the things are plugged in correctly and they're all the way in. Craig mentioned earlier, like sometimes it jiggles just enough to come out. You just push those things in, make sure they're good to go. You're probably going to be fine. I've also been in a situation where we're like, why is nothing coming out? And the mixer is muted or main stage is muted. So just check those things as well. And you can check those before the show, but that's a great thing to check to make sure when you're on the floor and something goes wrong. If all else fails, unplug everything, plug it back in really quick. Sometimes there's a connection point, especially if you're daisy chaining stuff together, there might be a connection point somewhere in the marimba line and you have no idea that it happened. Just unplug it, plug it back in. It takes, a little bit of time, but oftentimes if you turn it off and turn it back on again, it helps.
Yeah, I work professionally in audiovisual maintenance, and I can't tell you how many times I've fixed big problems just by turning the thing off and turning it right back on again. While we don't want to do that on the floor, because a lot of times, again, it takes time to boot stuff. It's kind of sometimes it's the last step that you can do to remedy the issue. I often recommend that people follow the signal flow or the signal path. So if your laptop is not making sound, the first thing we're going to do is check main stage. Like Jake said, is anything muted, blah, blah, blah. Does it look like sound is outputting from the computer? Okay, if that's good, then I'll go to the next point, which for me is a USB audio device. Is that on? Is that turned on? Okay, if everything checks out there and I'm getting indication that I'm getting sound out of that, then I go to the next point, which is generally going to be the mixer. Check the synth channels. Do I see that audio is coming into the mixer itself? You just have to keep going down the chain and checking every single box. And that's why it's so important to stay calm, because if you're a little too excited, it's easy to miss one component within the signal path that your sound is flowing through. So it works a whole lot better. Just take a few deep breaths and just say, you know what, it's just band, and we'll figure this out piece by piece.
Glad you were able to join us with this and maybe pick up a couple different tricks that you can use with your ensembles. If you have other interests in learning more about electronics, Craig made a really great resource in 2021 during the virtual season called Electronics Basics. You can find that on the MPA YouTube channel, and it has lots of great information about electronics, equipment, all the different things that you can dive more into.
Thanks for having me today, and thanks to everyone who's watching this. We wish you the best of luck with your season, and have a great show season.